Okay, I was asked a really, really good question by Nathan Brown. What do I think of charity boxing matches? What are loosely termed white collar matches? Well, I'll go into that, but first I'll tell you what I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover my concerns about these matches. I'm in two minds. I think they're a good thing, but I have concerns about them. Things that you need to realise if you're boxing in them, things that you need to make sure that your coach takes into consideration, and some general considerations as well. Firstly, concerns. Well, my first concern is matchmaking. Now, the matchmaker is often the promoter, and the person who's the promoter will have what they call their house fighter. Now, that will be the person who is the guy that they are training or their mate is training or something like that. Now, then there's the away corner. Now, this occurs in professional boxing too, far less so in amateur boxing, but it does occur. And the problem is that the matchmaker will often make sure that their house fighter is undermatched. That means that they are likely to be fighting someone with less experience than them. Let me give you a good example of how experience works. If you have 10 fights with 10 wins and 0 losses, and I have 20 fights with 10 wins, you take the number of wins and pretty much match them up. So if you've got the equal numbers of wins, as a novice boxer, you have novice, then you have open class. With novice boxers, if you have two novices with roughly the same amount of wins, it's what's called an even match. Now, if you have someone who has 20 fights and 20 wins against 10 fights and 10 wins, that's a bit of a mismatch. The guy with 20 fights or the lady with 20 fights has far more experience. Now, to give you an idea, if this is something you're thinking of doing for the first time, you want to be making sure that your opponent is someone with equal experience to you. Now, when they match people up at these events, this is the problem. What happens is the matchmaker matches people either on height and weight, but they don't give as much consideration to experience. Now, let me tell you something every boxing coach in the world knows. You can step up in weight, but you can't step up in class. And the problem with this is sometimes the promoter knows a fighter who will step in, somebody who could be an ex-professional, a very experienced amateur, and they're put in just because someone's dropped out of the fight, and you could end up fighting them. And this is a big problem because they could have 30, 40, 50, 60 matches or more, and they're fighting you, and you've got one or 0 matches behind you. So my first concern is matchmaking. If I could give you any advice, make damn sure that you are the house fighter. Sell more tickets than the other guy. You will be the house fighter. The more tickets you sell, because that's what the promoter's interested in, the better he or she will look after you. The second concern I have is medical care. Now, at any British Board of Boxing Control show or any, there has to be a medical crew present. In fact, two. Then, if you go to an amateur show, there has to be a medical crew present. Many of these shows don't have a medical crew present. Many of them don't have a doctor present. They just have someone who's got a vague idea. You don't even know that they're a doctor. So make sure, because nobody plays boxing. This is a fight, and don't make that mistake to think that it's anything else. My other concern is the age that a lot of people have, and this is a big factor. The Amateur Boxing Association doesn't really allow people to fight if they've been fighting in a long career beyond the age of 34. There's a fairly good reason for that. Your reactions get slower, whether you like it or not. My reactions aren't as good as when I was 20, nowhere near it. And a jab can go from here to here in 0.04 of a second. You've got less of a chance of getting out of the way of that if you're older. Your strength is generally usually lower as well. Your aerobic capacity is definitely lower. As every boxing coach in the world will tell you, the first thing to go are the legs. That doesn't mean that my legs won't move. It means that I'm not able to keep moving around with the same work rate as when I was younger. So the first thing to go are the legs. The last thing to go is the punch, which means that you've got two people who may not be able to avoid each other. So more damage can occur. So the age can be a factor. So there's another concern. Now, the other concern I have is, and this is the major one, this affects all aspects of boxing, is what we call a hometown decision. You could be the home guy and I could be the away guy, the away corner, and it doesn't matter what I do, I'm not going to win the fight because you'll get the hometown decision. So just be careful who the judges are and, kind of just be aware of that. That if you're going to be in a hometown decision, make sure you're the hometown fighter. Don't be searching around for one of these promotions to join in. Make sure that you get in with the promoter. It's going to make a big difference. Next things to realize if you're a boxer and you're going into these matches. One, head guards don't protect you from a punch. They're designed so that it's brought in predominantly for amateurs. Back in '91, I believe it was. The last three of my amateur fights I had wearing a head guard. I hated them. They make your head a bigger target. And they're designed because at lower level, boxers will come in and they come in like that and their heads can clash. And this stops boxers getting cuts. Now, we would generally wear one of these horrible things when we're sparring and training for a fight because we don't want to get a cut during training. Most boxers don't like the things, but they prevent you from getting cuts from a clash of heads. They don't really protect you from a punch, so don't expect them to because they won't. The other thing that you've got to bear in mind is that you need 20 weeks preparation for a fight. If you've never had a fight in your life, you need a lot of boxing background experience before you do it. But the minimum time you should be preparing for a fight is 20 weeks. You're going to need 12 weeks to get the basics and the good body of work behind you. And then you need a further 6 to 8, usually 8 weeks, in order to get to a peak. Otherwise, what happens is you come up to the fight and your load increases like this, and then you have your fight here, whereas really what you've got to do is just tail off a bit like that. Otherwise, your recovery is too low and you can't get you can't get your technique and your speed out. It takes 8 weeks for that to occur. So if a coach is telling you that you can prepare and you can be ready for 3 months, then walk away because that coach doesn't know what they're talking about. Now, this brings me then to the next concern I have, the coaches. You've got to make sure that your coach, I'm going to give you a few pointers here, but one thing, your coach doesn't need to have you doing aerobic training, going out for long runs. It doesn't work. A 3 by 2 minute or a 3 by 3 minute boxing match is anaerobic. If you don't know what that means, look it up. But your coach should not have you running 3 or 4 or 5 miles. It's not an accurate reflection of the way a boxing match goes. You should be running shorter repetition runs at higher work rate. It's important that. Another thing to bear in mind is you probably, if you're going to consider doing this, a generally fit guy or girl. You can't train for anything else when you're training for boxing. Don't even think about it. You're not doing your weight training, you're not doing your CrossFit, you're not doing anything else. You train for boxing only. Bear in mind that you could be fighting somebody like me. It could be an ex-professional fighter. It could be a very experienced amateur fighter. Someone that's put in by the promoter to move you around. No one's playing boxing. The other thing that you need to bear in mind is if your coach is not giving you any speed training, then you need to sack them. I've seen loads of videos of people who are in these fights and they're throwing punches like really, really slowly. They've clearly done no speed work. And this, almost always the person with the faster hands, when you're at novice level in boxing, the person with the faster hands generally wins. So it's vital and really important. Footwork should be the focus of your training. The majority of people that are getting punched is because they've got rubbish footwork. Not because they're not keeping their hands high, not because they're too tired, but because they don't know how to move out of the way of a punch. They're leaning too far forward, their balance is wrong, all sorts of problems like that. A lot of coaches focus purely on teaching the punches, which is great, that's part of it, but footwork, trust me on this, the thing that makes the difference at elite level boxing is footwork, footwork, and footwork. It makes all the difference. Watch some of the greats. Muhammad Ali. I mean, float like a butterfly. There, across there, float like a butterfly. Yeah, you could sting like a bee, but without floating like a butterfly, he'd get hit more. Getting hit more means you lose the fight. You've also got to do mental training as well, because at some point you're going to get hit. And if you're one of them people that gets the red mist that descends as soon as you're hit, your technique and all of your preparation and everything is just going to fly out of the window. So what you need to do is you need to be working on your mental preparation at least 15 minutes a day. If your coach doesn't have you doing that and doesn't have a periodized mental program, forget it. Just don't touch it. Here's a simple trick. A very simple trick that I'm going to show you. If you're going to be boxing, here's a good way of doing something. Remember this: trigger, block, attack. Now, a trigger doesn't mean you're going to throw a punch necessarily. A trigger could be something like I move towards you like this, and then I'll block your punch, and then I counter and I attack. It can be that if I move backwards, you might be able to see this. If I move my foot forward like that, and what is block, bam, like that. If you remember that, you could even be throwing a punch. It could be a head movement. It could be anything. It could be anything that you do. Trigger, block, attack. And that is a really, really good way of making sure that you're far more likely to unseat and to disrupt your opponent and to beat them. One of the biggest problems I find with coaches is that they don't train their boxers what to do when they get buzzed. And trust me, you're going to get buzzed in a fight at some point. By buzzed, I mean you're going to get hit and you're going to just think, whoa, what was that? What happened? What am I going to do? What do I do next? Now, there are certain drills. I do this with my boxers. A lot of coaches do this with theirs, and some just don't bother to do it at all. For example, I've seen some boxers where they've got hit. I'll move back for this. They've got hit, and they've bravely fought on, taking more punishment. Whereas from a body shot, if it's something like that, they should just take a knee, count, and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You need to be standing up in a count at 5 and 6, 6, 7, 8, and then the referee is going to ask you to walk forward 2 steps towards him or her. And you must do this without wobbling or being on what we call stiff legs. Now, if you're trained for that and you know what to do and you know where to count, you'll be fine. But if you wait till 8 or 9 to stand up, then the referee may well count you out, especially if you're the away fighter. They will take any opportunity to stop the fight. So you need to be up, clear, hands up, not down like this, hands up, and nod to the referee, and then walk forward 2 steps. If your trainer doesn't train you to do this, they're not preparing you for a fight, they're preparing you for a training session, for sparring. On the subject of sparring, let's just cover this really quickly. There are other videos I've done on sparring, but when you're sparring, it's commonplace. Before we start each round, we'll just touch gloves. It's also sometimes just a mark of respect when we're sparring. If we have a very good heated exchange, and just as a mark of respect, sometimes you'll touch glove after that. That's in sparring. You don't do that in a fight. There's only 2 times you touch gloves in a fight. Once at the beginning when the referee orders you to, and once before the final round when you come out and the referee will say touch, and you do it from a distance. Don't go up to them and go, that's lovely, and touch their hands like that. I'll do it from the side. Do it from a distance and you go, and you step back. As soon as you touch gloves, step back, because trust me, if you were fighting me, if you went like this and put your hands down, as soon as I've touched gloves with you, I'm going to hit you straight away. Remember, protect yourself at all times. Never turn away with your hands down and look at the referee and ask, can I do this? And don't be touching gloves after each exchange. It's not a sparring match. It's not sparring. No one wins a spar. This is a fight. It's very important. So none of this touching glove stuff. It's great. 2 times in the fight, and that's it. And if someone else is giving you too much respect, it means they don't want you to hurt them. So it means that you need to stick it into them a bit. So if they're touching gloves with you, they want to take it down a peg or two. Don't. Now, bearing in mind that all of these things, you're not going to get into the same kind of trouble as a pro is. In a 12-round fight, you can get into all kinds of trouble because your energy levels are dropping, your aerobic, your lactic acid is building up. There's all sorts of problems that you can get into as a pro. You're getting dehydrated. It's very hot in a boxing ring. So you're not going to get into the same kind of problems and stresses and strains as a professional fighter fighting 12 rounds. However, there are some things, you coach needs to be prepared for, such as, for example, taking 2 gum shields to the fight. If your gum shield gets knocked out, you're not allowed to continue fighting. As a pro, you are, but as in these kinds of fights, you're not. So you need a spare. Now, normally the coach is going to carry a moldable second gum shield, but it's your responsibility as well. You need to make sure that the coach has everything in that ring that you need to do, and check with them that they've got everything there. Now, you, one thing I get asked about this all the time: do I have a program? I'm not sure about my coach. My coach is great at the boxing side of things. Do I have a program I can give you that you can work towards? I don't, I'm afraid. I do have a program, but it is for amateur boxers, and they're training at a higher level, in all with all due respect, and it's preparing them for a much higher work rate, a much harder fight. I mean, yeah, it would help any boxer, but it is aimed at a different thing. I don't have that ready yet. If you would like me to do it, email me, and I can send the thing to you by later on. It's not free, but I can send the thing to you if you want to. But just trust me on this. If you haven't got 20 weeks to dedicate to this, don't even ask me for the program, because I won't give it to you. There's just no point. If I'm going to give you a program, I want you to win. And no one goes into a fight hoping to do well or to compete. We go in to win, and that's the only reason. Um, but if you are really seriously thinking about this, then email me, and I can send the thing through to you. Uh, I'll give you my personal email address. It's lon, LONBOXCEN at AOL.com, and you can send it to me, and I can send that to you at some point. Um, the final thing that I would like to say on this is, and this is a really good analogy, because you can only get into this if you're dead serious. This is not something you play at. Imagine I'm holding you, or someone else is holding you underwater, and I hold you underwater for about a minute and a half, something like that, for longer than you can hold your breath for. The only thing you're thinking about is, can I breathe? I want to breathe. I must breathe. If you're going to go into a fight and you're not thinking that you want it as much as that breath when you're being held underwater, then quite frankly, don't even bother. The the boxing ring is not the right place for you. Just leave it to those who really have that desire, that need, because quite frankly, the the truth is that you could be fighting a fighter trained by me, and if you don't want it that much, you haven't put the work in, and I've given you a training program, it's just not going to work for you. So save yourself the trouble and the heartache. The final question I'd leave you with before you decide whether you go ahead and do a white collar fight is, how badly do I want to win? And if it's not with every fibre of your being, then do something else. Run a marathon. Do something else. Compete. Do a mud run. Do something else. They're all fantastic ways of raising money for charity, but please don't go into a boxing ring unless you're completely and utterly committed and you must win. That's the only thing I've got to say on that, guys. Treat it seriously. It's not a fun thing to do. It's a very, very serious thing to do. But if you are going to do it, I wish you the very best of luck.